In 1932, the Australian military mobilised soldiers, machine guns, and the full authority of the federal government to fight birds. Not metaphorical birds, not a code name, not a clever military operation with an animal nickname. Actual emus. Giant, flightless, deeply unimpressed emus. And the emus won. This is the story of the Great Emu War of 1932. And I want to be very clear with you from the start. Every single word of what you are about to hear is completely, verifiably, historically true. This happened on this planet to actual human beings who had to explain their decisions to a government, to a press corps, and eventually to history. Welcome to Saga Untold. Let's begin. To understand how Australia ended up at war with birds, you need to understand the situation on the ground in Western Australia in 1932. The Great Depression had arrived, and it had arrived hard. Wheat prices had collapsed. Markets that Australian farmers depended on had dried up almost overnight. Into this situation came a government scheme with good intentions and complicated consequences. Ex-soldiers, men who had survived the mud and the wire and the gas and the horror of the Western Front in the First World War, had been given parcels of land in the Campion district of Western Australia as part of a resettlement program. The idea was a good one. Take men who had given everything for their country, give them land, give them a future, give them something to build. These were not soft men. They sank wells into the hard ground. They cleared scrub, they built homes, they planted wheat and watched it grow. And then the emus came. 20,000 of them, moving as a single, unstoppable, largely indifferent mass across the landscape, heading directly for the most fertile farmland in the region. The farmers did what people do when a problem exceeds their capacity to solve it alone. They asked the government for help. Now, before we go any further, let me give you the facts about emus, because I think it's important you understand exactly what the Australian military was dealing with. An adult emu stands nearly 2 meters tall and weighs 60 kilograms. They can run at 50 kilometers an hour. They can kick with sufficient force to break bones. They do not herd. The moment they perceive a threat, they divide into dozens of small, independent groups moving in different directions simultaneously. They do not respond to loud noises. They do not respond to the concept of human authority. They are, in the words of one frustrated Australian official, essentially impossible to manage. 20,000 of them were now moving through the Campion district, eating wheat crops and pulling down fences. The farmers petitioned the government. The government, to its credit and possibly its lasting embarrassment, took the request seriously. There is a photograph of an emu taken during this period that I think perfectly captures the energy of what was about to unfold. The emu is simply looking at the camera. Not aggressively, not fearfully, not with any discernible awareness that anything of significance is happening in its vicinity. Just looking. With an expression that communicates with extraordinary clarity for a bird. I have absolutely no idea what you think is about to happen here. I have 17 things I would rather be doing, and I am, fundamentally, not worried about any of this. That expression. That is the energy of the entire Emu War, compressed into a single photograph of a bird that cannot be bothered. On the 2nd of November, 1932, Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery arrived in the Campion district. With him, 2 soldiers. 2 Lewis guns, heavy machine guns designed for battlefield use, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Major Meredith was, by all accounts, quietly and entirely reasonably confident. He was a military professional with genuine experience. He had served in the First World War. He understood tactics, terrain, logistics, and the application of superior firepower to a problem. He looked at the situation before him. There were birds. He had machine guns. The birds did not have machine guns. He felt good about the mathematics of this encounter. He should not have felt good about the mathematics of this encounter, but he didn't know that yet. Intelligence had indicated that approximately 2,500 emus were congregating near a local dam in the Campion district. This was the opportunity Major Meredith had been waiting for. The dam was a fixed point. The emus needed water. They would cluster, and when they clustered, the Lewis guns would have a clear field of fire. The plan was elegant. Set up both guns at the dam, wait, open fire when the birds were clustered at the water, conclude operations before lunch. At 500 rounds per minute across 2 guns with 10,000 rounds between them, this was not a plan with a large margin for failure. Major Meredith did the mathematics. The mathematics were reassuring. The emus had not done the mathematics. The emus did not recognize the authority of mathematics. On the morning of November the 2nd, the emus arrived at the dam exactly as predicted. 2,500 birds, clustered together, in range, right where the guns were pointing. Major Meredith gave the order to open fire. And the emus scattered. Not in panic, not in a chaotic rout. They simply divided. Instantly, seemingly by collective agreement, as if they had been briefed in advance, into hundreds of small, independent groups, and walked away from the guns in different directions simultaneously. As if they had been briefed. As if someone had explained to them in advance the specific tactical limitations of fixed-position machine guns. The Lewis guns opened fire. They hit some emus. The emus that were hit mostly kept moving. An ornithologist who later examined the records of the engagement noted, and I am quoting the official record directly, that the emus could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. Then the guns jammed. The dust, the heat, the completely unprecedented operational environment of firing First World War battlefield hardware at flightless birds in rural Western Australia. The Lewis guns jammed, repeatedly. Major Meredith stood in a field surrounded by empty cartridge casings, watching emus walk away from him in every direction with expressions of absolute indifference. He requested permission to continue operations. The Minister of Defence, who was, at this moment, reading newspaper coverage of the campaign, was beginning to have some significant thoughts about this request. The official record of the first engagement is a document of considerable historical beauty. Rounds fired, approximately 2,500. Emus confirmed killed, approximately 50. That is, for anyone tracking the mathematics that Major Meredith had felt so reassured by, a ratio of 50 rounds per emu. The campaign had cost the Australian government the equivalent of several $1,000s in ammunition to kill 50 large birds. Major Meredith requested permission to continue. The newspapers, who had by now fully discovered the story and were covering it with gleeful enthusiasm, were absolutely delighted. Operations continued for a further week. The results did not substantially improve. The emus continued to scatter the moment the guns opened fire. The guns continued to jam in the heat and dust. The newspapers continued to cover every development with increasing enthusiasm and decreasing sympathy for the military's position. On the 8th of November, 1932, less than 1 week after operations began, the Australian government ordered Major Meredith and his soldiers to withdraw. The Great Emu War was officially concluded. The emus retained operational control of the Campion district. Major Meredith, who was by every account a perfectly capable military officer in any context that did not specifically involve flightless birds, was later quoted as expressing genuine admiration for his opponents. He compared their dispersal tactics to those of Zulu warriors. He meant this entirely as a compliment. The emus were unavailable for comment. The Great Emu War is funny. It is genuinely, objectively, historically funny, and I don't want to take that away from it. But there is something worth sitting with underneath the comedy. 20,000 animals were doing exactly what animals have always done. Following ancient migration routes, searching for water and food, moving across land that had been their land long before anyone arrived with the intention of planting wheat on it. They weren't an enemy, they were just there. History is full of moments like this. Moments where the absurdity is so perfectly formed that you almost miss the thing underneath it. This channel exists to find those moments. Every story here is true. None of them are what you expect. If this was the kind of history you didn't know you needed, like, share, subscribe, and I will see you next Thursday.